Welcome back. So this is part two, discussing the book a little bit. Again, Israel, Nation of Warriors. I dedicated it to three people in my family. I dedicated it to my nephew Ari, who served in the Second Lebanon War as a paratrooper, Airborne 101, and who lost friends and commanders. Dedicated to my brother Eitan, who served in the Israeli army as well in a combat unit and saw a lot of action. And I dedicated to my father, who served in the Yom Kippur War despite being overage, so to speak. And he fought and he was a role model. And of course I dedicated to my mother as well, who is the cornerstone of our family, and without her none of this would have been possible. So I dedicated to these four people. I want to tell a couple of things from this book. First, we start from the beginning, the attitude of the Israeli people, but then I go back to the origin of the People's Army, which is in the Bible. I tell the story of the Hebrew warriors throughout the Hebrew Bible, and from the very first Hebrew, today we call ourselves Jews, but then it was Hebrews, children of Israel, Abraham, and I go through the Bible taking all the warriors and the leaders and showing how with us, the spiritual leader, the man of God, is also the man of war. So I start with Abraham. People usually don't think of Abraham as a warrior, but Abraham was actually the first Krav Maga instructor. Of this there's no doubt. Although of course he didn't call it Krav Maga. But the story is told that his nephew Lot, L-O-T, Lot, was taken captive by four very fierce kings, local kings. The four kings who had defeated the five kings. They had quite a reputation. So Abraham went to war. It says he took his 316 members of his household, 316 men, and they went out to war. We read the Bible with the biblical commentaries. So on this verse, where it says, Vayarek et Hanichav, and he emptied out all his disciples, the biblical commentator, Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra from the 12th century Spain, writes the following, because he has taught them many times and trained them in the art of war, even though it's not specifically mentioned in the text. Meaning here that Abraham was not only the father of the monotheistic view, which Jews, Christians, and Muslims adhere to, but also he was a warrior and a combative instructor. Abraham trained all 316 members of his household. You were a member of Abraham's household, you knew how to fight. And at the moment that his nephew was taken captive, he went to rescue him. He didn't form a committee, he didn't send letters of protest, he went to war. And the rabbis also say the word vayarek is similar to the Hebrew word yarok, which means green. Was he afraid? They said he was so afraid he turned green. He was very afraid. But when it comes to saving your nephew, you go to war and you don't hold back. I also tell in this book stories of ordinary Israelis who did extraordinary things. And we're all ordinary, that's the point. And Israeli soldiers who gave their everything. Just tell briefly two stories. One of Ro'i Klein, whose picture, I show here the picture of his tomb, his cemetery grave. Ro'i Klein, may rest in peace, says here the son of Shoshana and Aharon, was a commander in the Israeli army, and a hand grenade was thrown towards his group during the Lebanon War. He said what we say before we die, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, Shema Yisrael. He jumped on the hand grenade, exploding his own body and saving his men. He survived long enough to take the, what do you call it, the Machshir Kesher, the walkie-talkie, whatever it's called, the device for communicating. And he said, this is Ro'i Klein reporting the death of Ro'i Klein. And then he died. Tragic story. One more story I want to share is of someone who I didn't know him personally, but I know his family very well. We became very close after he died. A young man named Philip Moscow, whose family came from Russia. He was born in Russia himself. And most of the family had been killed at the hands of the Nazis during the Holocaust, World War II. And this branch of the family survived and came to Israel. The name Moscow is actually his mother's maiden name. But he took the name because there had been no survivors to carry on the name. Philip, from what I understand, and I've grown to know him very well over the years since he passed away, was an incredible young man. He volunteered all over Ma'ale Adumim. He volunteered as a medic and with the police force, and I've heard people speak about him. He was like a saint, gave everything to everyone. And Philip, when time came to join the army, had a problem. He was enormously overweight. He had a weight problem, and they rejected him. He had to lose more than 25 kilo, more than 50 pounds, just to enter the army. And he did, because he wanted so badly to serve. One day, my brother came to visit my nephew on the border of Lebanon as they were going in. And as it turns out, my nephew said that there's a young man here who wanted to ride home. My brother said, sure, where are you going? And he said, Ma'ale Adumim. We started talking. Turns out my mother was quite close with his mother, Luba. My mother volunteers a lot on behalf of Jews from the former Soviet Union. She helps them integrate into Israeli society. She arranges things for them and so forth. So my mother knew the family quite well. And my brother called up my mother and said, guess what I have in my car? Philip Moscow is coming home for Shabbat. So my mother called Luba, her friend, and told her, and Luba was so excited. She said, thank you for telling me. This way I know my son's coming home. I can prepare all the dishes that he likes. I can go shopping. She was so excited. It's very difficult to tell you how the story ends, but just a short while later, I was with my mother in the car. We were driving to visit my brother in Beit Shemesh, and it was during the war, and every day they announced the casualties, and we're driving, and then we heard the news. List of names, 2 boys from Ma'ale Adumim, and it says Philip Moscow from Ma'ale Adumim. And it was just, this is the price we pay. This is the price we pay for being free in our own land. And that's just a little bit of the stories that I tell here in this book, the story of Israel as a fighting nation.